Okay, we're recording.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. And welcome to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's stakeholder meeting for New Jersey Administrative Code, Title VII, Chapter 36, subchapters 25 and 26. And this is for the post-Green Acres funding compliance requirements for local parkland. And this meeting today is geared toward our local government partners and is for the new rulemaking we're doing in the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration, or OTPLA for short. And today is January 18th, 2023. And this meeting will take place between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. The meeting notice said 10 a.m. to noon, but we're going to be available for an extra hour if folks want to talk. And you don't have to stay on the whole meeting time. It's just we're going to be available during this whole time. And my name is Caroline Keefe, and I'm the Regulatory Officer in the Public Land Compliance section of the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration. And I'm going to be helping out as moderator today. Okay, to start the meeting, we have a general disclaimer. The information presented during this meeting is intended to facilitate discussion on various existing and potential regulatory mechanisms. No final agency decision regarding this information is expressed or implied. And again, just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded. And to review our attendance, similar to other stakeholder meetings we've had recently, we're going to ask if you're attending via the Teams link to please enter your first and last name and affiliation in the chat box. If you have dialed into the meeting via phone or cannot access the chat box, we ask that you please send your name or email your name, phone number, and affiliation to our email address at otpla@dep.nj.gov. And this helps us keep track of those in attendance. And to review the speaking guidelines and etiquette. So during the meeting, we ask that you please keep your microphone muted and your camera turned off. To request the opportunity to respond, speak, or ask a question, please enter your name and affiliation in the chat box. For those calling in who don't have access to the chat, we're going to be taking breaks during the meeting and giving those folks a chance to speak as well. When called on to speak, you may unmute yourself, and if you'd like to turn on your camera. And when you have finished speaking, please remute yourself and turn off your camera. And again, just for folks who don't have access to the chat or who are calling in, we're going to be taking breaks and giving you an opportunity to speak. And just to start off, we're going to be allotting 3 minutes per speaker. If it looks like we don't need to have that time limit or we're going to have more time, we can open that up a little bit. For technical problems, please either ask for assistance in the chat or send an email to our address, otpla@dep.nj.gov. And thank you for all who have submitted comments and offered verbal comments thus far. It's been very productive. And we encourage you, if you think of something later or want to elaborate, to please send written comments or questions to the OTPLA rulemaking team at our email address, otpla@dep.nj.gov. And please put rulemaking in the subject line. Okay, at this time, I'd like to introduce Judith N.J.A.C. She is the Assistant Director in the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration. Judith's going to be taking over this portion of the meeting, and I will continue to serve as moderator. So Judith, I yield the floor to you.
Thanks, Caroline. So some of you may know that we had a reorganization almost a year ago at this point, and until that time, Nancy Lawrence, wave Nancy, who was also helping us moderate, Caroline and I were part of the Green Acres program, and we and another section from Green Acres were pulled into this new office called Transactions and Public Land Administration. The purpose of the reorganization was to centralize certain functions, including legal review of contracts and grants, and legal oversight of both DEP-owned land and preserved land in which the department has an interest, such as Green Acres and Comfort Park land. So it's going to be a little hard to read our organizational chart for our new office, even if we enlarge it, but I'll just give you an overview of the new office. So in the middle, in kind of the pale orange color, what some of you may have known as the former Bureau of Legal Services and Stewardship in the Green Acres program is now the public land compliance section within our new Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration. That's the center part of the chart, and that's the section that's most directly responsible for the parts of the rules that we're talking about today. And Nancy Lawrence, who's helping us moderate, is the manager of that section. Over on the left, where it says Public Land Administration, some of you may know that section as having been the Office of Leases and Concessions that was formerly in the Assistant Commissioner for Natural and Historic Resources office. That assistant commissionership no longer exists. So leases and concessions were pulled into this new office, and that public land administration section is headed by Adria Wenzel. Over on the right, in the kind of pale purple color, is what we now know as our legal and transactional operations section. This is essentially the Green Acres closing team, headed by Lauren Persida as the manager. And most of the staff in that section are paralegals who help us handle our real estate closings. The new office is headed up by Rob Guzek, who is not on the phone with us today, but might be joining us a little later as director. And as Caroline mentioned, I'm the assistant director. So again, this office was intended to bring a lot of functions related to administration of both the department's own land and other publicly preserved land into one place, hopefully to ensure consistency of decision making, and hopefully also over time to improve efficiency in how we respond to requests to use properties, both DEP owned and locally owned. So for purposes of the upcoming rulemaking, our rulemaking team is Rob Guzek, our director, myself, Nancy Lawrence, and Caroline Keefe, our regulatory officer and moderator today. So what we're here to talk about today is what right now is part of the Green Acres rules. And if you go into the chat where you're entering your name and your affiliation, at the very top of the chat, we provided some links. One is to the existing rules and one is to a hot topics document. And we also included our email address that Caroline has given you. So in those Green Acres rules right now, subchapters 25 and 26 apply to post-funding compliance requirements. So subchapter 25 outlines what our expectations are as far as managing property if you take Green Acres funding to acquire or develop it. And also for parkland that ends up on a recreation and open space inventory as unfunded parkland. The rules apply to both directly funded parkland and to that unfunded parkland. And then subchapter 26 is primarily what people know as our diversion application process. So for those occasions where someone wants to file a request to lift the Green Acres restriction from parkland, subchapter 26 has a pretty detailed process for how you can make that request. We last made substantive changes to these rules in 2005, and those of you who have attended the State Land Trust Conference or other presentations that we've given since then have been hearing us say for a long time that we intend to update the rules. So the time is now, but with the new reorganization, we're going to pull subchapters 25 and 26 out of the Green Acres rules and put them in a new chapter specific to the new office. There may be other topics that we end up covering in those rules as well, but that's not the subject of today's meeting. So we're here today not to talk about how you can obtain Green Acres funding and what the process is for funding, but to talk about what happens after, as I put it, you have the ribbon cutting and hand out the big fake check. And Martha Sapp, the director of Green Acres, hands the file to Nancy and says, here, we did this great project and you need to keep track of it for all time to make sure that the property we helped buy or develop stays as parkland. So we're here today to listen to those of you who have had experience with our post-funding requirements, talk about what you like, what you don't like, and what you think we should change. I know a little concern has been expressed over the hot topics document that we've distributed. The topics on that list were intended to spur discussion, but to some degree, they reflect things we get asked about on a regular basis and think we might have to address in the new rules. I do want to put it out there just right up front, though, that there was some reaction to the fact that we put the word leases on that list. And for those of you not familiar with that process, we do review leases now for Green Acres funded parkland and for unfunded parkland. And we wanted feedback on that process, whether it's too difficult, whether there's other things we should consider as part of our review. It was not intended to be a prompt that we are considering allowing wholesale commercialization of local parks. So I just want to put that concern to rest if I possibly can. And as Caroline already mentioned, and as stated on that list, the list is just for discussion purposes. We have not made any big substantive decisions yet as far as the new rules, and we really do want people's feedback. So this is just one of several meetings where we're going to try to solicit that input. So I think I've covered just about everything, and I just want to reiterate that if there's a comment you don't feel comfortable making on the record today, or you think of something afterwards, or you want to ponder something that's said and give us your feedback later, you can send an email to the email address there at the bottom, otpla@dep.nj.gov. Please just put rulemaking in the subject line so we can sort through the emails. We have 3 more stakeholder meetings scheduled for this month, 2 next week and 1 in the evening the following week, after which we will seriously be sitting down and reviewing the comments, but we'll take comments all throughout this process. You can email us anytime. And the video of the prior stakeholder meetings is posted on the website in the same location as the meeting notice. And we'll be posting a video of this session as soon as our IT people turned into something that can be shared publicly. So I'm going to turn it over to Nancy and Caroline to determine the order of commenters. I think we might have fewer people than we've had at our prior meetings, so there should be plenty of time. We probably won't need to limit you to 3 minutes unless we get a huge influx of people. And we've had a little bit of a dialogue. I mean, this is mostly a listening session, but I will jump in if I feel like I can explain something about the current rules or dispel any, misinformation about what the current rules say or what we're thinking about doing. So, we'll engage in discussion to the extent we can. And we'll see how the time goes. And I should just mention, I think Caroline alluded to this, but this meeting's scheduled for 2 hours. We have reserved 3 hours. We will have a hard stop at the end of the 3rd hour if it goes that long, because the 3 of us have another meeting we have to go to. But we'll end it at the 2-hour mark if there's not additional comment at that point. Okay, I don't know, Nancy. I see some people identifying themselves in the chat, but I'm not clear that they want to speak. So I don't know if you want to go down that list.
So I just added a little chat to start discussion, and after that, notification in the chat, or if folks are not able to access, they could either raise their hand or I guess speak from the phone.
Right. So even if you entered your name and affiliation in the chat box, if you want to speak, please put it in there below Caroline's message that she just put there. Or raise your hand. That's fine.
I see Jessica Kubida from Monmouth County would like to speak.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I
Hi.
appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys. I'm probably going to be reiterating the same stuff that I've touched on the previous um, conversations. But we met internally here with Special County Counsel. He was supposed to jump on, Jeff Beekman, but I don't see him on here.
Actually, he jumped on and then he jumped off. So,
Oh, okay, something must be up. So we met with engineering, our farmland people, and the park system, not only to go over what we might ask of Green Acres to consider, but also how we can improve internally our processes to avoid these minor diversions and amendments. Like Andy said to you in the email he sent after the last meeting, unfortunately, historically, there's projects that are going to already be encumbered. So, we were talking about, most of this is questions for you, or maybe just, having a conversation, not really a statement. But, in these historic encumbrances, would there be a way to make it an amendment? And if so, could you do it administratively? And if so, what kind of documentation would you need for us to prove that it wasn't intended to be encumbered and indeed it should be road right of way, or I guess whatever else the infrastructure might be?
I was going to ask, you're mostly talking about road projects, right?
Well, yeah, I think there's one that they're working on that's a bridge project, and that has something that's not my project, so I'm not very aware of it. Um, but yeah, road, bridges.
So, when we last did the rules in 2005, there were starting to be a lot of bridge replacements, and we tried to dip our toe into allowing more flexibility by saying that if there was no official right of way for the bridge itself, that you could connect the dots with the road right of way on either side of the bridge and assume that, excuse me, as being a right of way for the bridge, and that we wouldn't call that a diversion. I think we found in the last 15 years that often that doesn't quite go far enough, because there's a need to, even if the bridge isn't being widened, there's a need to shore up the supports for the bridge, and it often strays outside that area that we attempted to define. I've certainly considered um, trying to come up with some small percentage that could be exceeded, without calling that a diversion. Ironically, if there's a written right of way for the bridge, that would probably be harder to do. But if there's no right of way, we might be able to make some assumptions and allow a little bit of expansion without calling that a diversion. So it's something we can consider. I mean, if you're talking about a more general ability to make an argument that something shouldn't have been listed on an inventory, that there already is a process for that, and Nancy administers that. You can ask for a Rosie amendment, but based on some litigation we had a while back, we're held to a pretty strict standard for evaluating those requests. The requester has to prove that the listing was a bona fide error, so as not to have the Rosie amendment process become an end run around the diversion process. I mean, if you can take an eraser to the inventory and say, oops, that was a mistake, why would you ever go through the diversion process? So the court was very concerned about making people prove that things were mistakenly listed, but we are able to grant some of those requests. As far as kind of being able to carve out additional right-of-way where your county parks front on county roads, that gets a little more difficult. I think it's not that we're unwilling to acknowledge that those projects need to happen. The problem is that all the various Green Acres Bond Acts and enabling acts say that a diversion requires a public hearing, which seems to then say that the public hearing has to be site specific. So I've been giving a lot of thought to whether we can do kind of something analogous to a permit by rule or a general permit, but we still have the statutory requirement for a public hearing, which might not make the process any easier. So we're kind of grappling with that right now, and maybe that's something you want to ask county council to take a look at and see if he could share his thoughts with us.
Yeah, there was some conversation too that sometimes the property owner owns right up into the middle of the road. I'm not really familiar with that either. But I'm just throwing some of these discussions out there. I do know that when we went through a Sharon Station Road, we had to do a farmland preservation, I guess, amendment. They call it something else. But Harriet, who works at Monmouth County for the farmland, she was able to change the definition of what was encumbered, and so she eliminated the linear infrastructure. Now, I don't know if that's something that you guys can or would consider. We try to look at it from your side as well, but is there a way the wording of or the definition of compelling public need or significant public benefit would be able to include government agencies' infrastructure for transportation and safety, or is that overreaching?
So just for the benefit of the others on the phone, what Jessica's referring to is we have some thresholds for the diversion process. One is that the proposed diversion have a compelling public need or significant public benefit associated with it, and the other is that there be no non-parkland alternatives. I would say that 99.9% of the time, we don't question whether any kind of a road project, intersection improvement, bridge replacement, those kind of sail over that public need, public benefit hurdle. We do sometimes push back on alternatives. Why does it have to be on the park side and not the other side of the road? But that doesn't get you to where I think you want to be, which is for us to not call it a diversion at all. So we'd have to think about that some more. And if you
Judith,
want to,
I mean, Judith, I am an environmentalist myself, and I understand the concern, whether or not the engineering design is good, if people are just being lazy. So I understand that's why I'm asking questions of you guys, rather than saying, I would like this, this, and this, because there's things that I'm considering that you might not be considering, and things that you have to consider that I'm not considering. So that's why I was trying to have a conversation.
We actually don't mind if you send us your wish list of what you would say if you were writing the rules. So, again, there's not a whole lot of detail in the Green Acre statutes about what is or is not a diversion or what the process should be. But the basics are that it does have to go to the State House Commission, that it's something that's not a recreation or conservation use of the property, and that unfortunately there needs to be a public hearing every time. So within those parameters, we're trying to figure out how to ease up on the smaller projects and on the ones that have an obvious public purpose and lack of alternatives. So we're not opposed to considering anything you might suggest along those lines, because I think your county has had probably more experience with some of this than others have. So I think we can benefit from that.
Yeah, again, the notes that I have, what part of the public noticing can we reduce or eliminate for an amendment and or a minor diversion that would be less costly and time consuming? The internet seems to provide opportunities to be more effective and efficient in public noticing. The other is the number of required paper copies. The applications are unwieldy. So, would you consider reducing the number of paper copies required and just post on various agencies or local governments websites instead?
So on both of those, yeah, we're heading in that direction. I think we're probably going to go paperless if we can with the application, except with the possible exception of the copy that you put in the library if someone doesn't want to have to go talk to the local clerk to get the application.
Sure.
But as far as we're concerned, most of the time, if we get a paper application, we end up having to scan it anyway. So we're trying to figure out a way to go paperless, and Nancy's working with me on what that portal might look like. So definitely we will be reducing the number of paper copies. Public notice yeah, we're gonna completely reevaluate that. We did the rule so long ago that not all municipalities had their own websites. If you look at the rules, it says to post notice of the hearing on the website if the town or county has one, because they didn't all have them. Now they do. So we definitely will be heading more in that direction. I think I've already said publicly that we're going to eliminate the requirement for the display ad, which, you know, a lot of people don't see a paper copy of the newspaper anymore. So that's just an expense and a hassle that for something that not many people will see. We probably can't eliminate the legal notice altogether, but I think most towns and counties are used to placing legal notices in the course of their business. So I'm not sure that's a huge issue, but and yeah, so generally speaking, we're looking to streamline those notice requirements.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's all I have right now.
Okay, thanks. And
giving it-
please do feel free to follow up with another email if you'd like.
Okay, thank you so much.
We have Nick Homiak. He wrote in the chat, he's local Highlands advocate, volunteer in parks. Like to comment on Knoll Golf Park utility in Parsippany, the nature of their land managements, specifically extreme tree removal. And he notes that Knoll is 335.58 acres, the largest green acre open space property in Parsippany. Mr. Homiak, if you're on, you'd like to speak, you can unmute yourself. Turn off your camera if you want. And it's okay too to comment in the chat, but I just want to give you a chance to speak as well if you'd like to follow up on that comment. Oh, good. Hi, can you hear us? I think you might be muted. Let's see.
He's unmuted.
Oh, he's unmuted. Okay. Hi, Mr. Homiak, would you like to further comment? I think he might be having some tech issues. Can give him a little bit more time. And we don't have a long line of speakers, so I can give him some more time here. And I guess another thing too is you can just follow up in the chat as well if you want us to read your comments aloud. Sorry about that, though. Hopefully we can get your audio working soon.
Okay, well, we figured that out. If there's someone else who would like to speak, either raise your hand or put your name in the chat, please. Okay, I don't see anyone with a hand raised or in the chat. So I'll just mention that some of the issues off the hot topics list that have spurred the most discussion at the past stakeholder meetings have been agricultural use of parkland, forestry on parkland, and I think we got a little bit into leasing on one of the meetings, but I think, oh, hunting. I knew there was a third issue. So agriculture, forestry, and hunting, I would say of the.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Oh, good.
Oh. Yeah, I'm the one on the Knoll golf facility. It is the largest green acres or open space property. We have a river sensitive area, the Rockaway River that goes after the dam, but the public doesn't have any say what goes on that property. And for the last at least 2 years, they've been taking down healthy oak trees and beech trees. And in one particular area, there's a riparian zone. Now, they say it's for ash trees. They're not ash trees. Me and my friend Laura examined them. They're definitely oaks and beech. And they also use Roundup on the property, even though we have, groundwater recharge, and there is a well there that's used by the facility, I guess, for watering the lawn. But the fact that the public has no input on how this property's managed, a lot of invasive species there. Like I said, the use of the chemical. We have a open space committee, environmental committee. They're never consulted. They're at the whim of the mayor. But I'd like for something to happen with that landscape, so at least healthy trees are protected. They claim that the trees block the sunlight to the grass, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about the position of the sun, especially in a high summer. But to sacrifice healthy trees for grass just seems, absurd. So I plan on following through with some comments. And there's also a small historical aspect to that landscape. George Washington had a tent there. I've proposed carry in, carry off for the golfers. None of that ever gets back to me. There's never a rebuttal or anything. So it's just like a closed circle, but yet it's an open space Green Acres area. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments, and we'll review your email when you send it. I just want to mention kind of one overarching issue, which is that, since 1961, I think we've given funding to approximately 2/3 of the municipalities in New Jersey. So Nancy, roughly how many?
A lot.
Over 300. I know it's
Yeah,
over
yeah.
300. So
I would say it's definitely closer to 400 and all 21 counties.
So although we certainly have an oversight role for local parks, and I think something kind of unique to New Jersey is that as a condition of our funding, we can prevent a town or a county from selling parks, even ones we didn't help them pay for. And we can, to some degree, control to make sure that there's reasonable public access. We're not running the parks, and we can't possibly run the parks. So, day-to-day management decisions about how parks are operated are pretty far outside our purview. And so certainly things like pesticide application in individual park, I don't think is something we're ever going to be able to address. I think we do hear concerns about pesticides being used for agriculture because people perceive that as something that we're allowing to happen and should have some control over. But, and certainly if trees were being removed for other, a non-park purpose, we could get involved. But I just want to make clear that, we and our small staff are not running the parks, and to some extent don't have control over the day-to-day operations. But I do appreciate your comments, and we're certainly receptive to anything you think we could do within that framework.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So I think we do have a couple more in the chat, Nancy.
We see Robin Ray of Bedminster Township Administrator Clerk saying they're here. I'm not sure if that's for attendance or for chat, but we'll give Robin Ray a chance to speak if they'd like.
Yeah, no, I have nothing. I'm just listening.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then we can go on to the next individual. John Thonett, president of N.J.A.C, president of N.J.A.C Associates Incorporated, Environmental Planning and Engineer Design Consultants. I'd like to speak.
Yes, I want to thank you for doing this. This is very helpful. I'm just mostly listening because I'm in the business of consulting on all kinds of environmental and land use planning issues. Two quick questions. I see we're referring to local parkland and the idea that topics related to N.J.A.C. 7:36, 25, and 26, they're going to be moved into another area under this new organization. I just want to clarify that all of the changes are just regarding local parkland, such as county parks and municipal parks acquired using Green Acres funding. Does that also include nonprofit interests?
Yes, it does. Although Green Acres only has jurisdiction over directly funded nonprofit properties. So a nonprofit that took money to acquire the property or develop it, for trail purposes or something like that. Nonprofits don't have a recreation and open space inventory, so we don't assert jurisdiction over property they might have bought with a private donation or a foundation money or something like that. But the ones that Green Acres directly assisted, yes, covered by the same exact rules.
And so these new changes to the rules, they won't affect state-owned lands acquired with Green Acres funding?
Right. We don't technically have rules that articulate how we manage our own properties. Generally, administrative rulemaking is for the regulated public and not the agency itself. Although when I alluded to the fact that the chapter might cover other topics, we might put some detail in the rules about just the process we follow when considering requests to use our own property. The commissioner also has oversight over releases of conservation restrictions, and we might devote a little bit of space in the new rules to just telling people how they can ask for that type of approval. But no, technically these rules will have nothing to do with DEP-owned property other than the fact that we try to maintain some degree of consistency between the state and local side of the program as far as what we allow or don't allow on the properties, because it's mostly all Green Acres funded. So same source of funding. So to the extent we can, we try to be consistent on our own property with what we tell municipalities, counties, and nonprofits they can do on Green Acres encumbered parkland.
Thank you. One more quick question. Forever and ever I've been in business now for 41 years, and this definition of recreation and conservation purposes has been modified several times, but it doesn't really define whether or not forestry related activities are considered conservation purposes, and if so, under what circumstances. It's not clear in the definition. Will that definition be, firmed up a little bit?
So this has been one of the hot topics. We've been approached by several nonprofits who feel we should be more involved in the process by which the department approves forestry plans that affect, certainly the ones that affect parks. I'm not sure we can insert ourselves in that process necessarily, but we certainly hear about it when people feel like what's happening under an approved forestry plan is not good for the park. In the last stakeholder session, I said that forestry was part of that definition, and I stand corrected that it actually says the word forests, plural. And I think we're going to have to figure out what we mean by that. So certainly some of the people who were on last time saw a distinction between the word forests and the word forestry. And, we don't like being the lightning rod when the public only finds out about a forestry plan when the chainsaw is out there on the property. So there's definitely a lack of, don't quote me on this, even though this is being recorded. I mean, there's a perception that there's a lack of transparency when a forestry plan is submitted to the other part of the department, to the forestry program for approval, and that people don't necessarily know what the town is thinking about doing and don't know that the plan has been approved until, again, it's being implemented and someone brings a chainsaw out to the park. So even though we don't think we can insert ourselves into that process, we're trying to figure out how to avoid those conflicts. In general, we don't feel like it's the role of our program to second guess our forestry experts if they approve a forest stewardship plan and are saying that the activities authorized by that plan are appropriate for the health of the forest. I know sometimes critics of those plans feel like it's thinly disguised commercial logging and not for the health of the forest, but I just don't know how to resolve that conflict because I'm not a forestry expert. So we're open to input on that particular topic. It is a hot topic and something we're going to have to address in some fashion.
Well, Judith, that's very helpful to me. I get questions all the time regarding everything you just said. One suggestion that I would have is that as part of what you're doing, I would suggest that your department ask the legislature to define, once again, the term recreation and conservation purposes and be very specific about what it includes. And that'll end that discussion.
Well, a couple of things about that. Our current source of funding is a dedication of a portion of the corporate business tax. There was a referendum to authorize that dedication, but then there's a statute called the Preserve New Jersey Act that dictates how the money is split between us and agriculture and the Historic Trust.
I'm familiar. Yes.
Okay, and so you're probably familiar that the original allocation of the money was for 2 or 3 years, and then it needed to be reauthorized as part of this administration. So that reauthorization has happened, and as far as I know, that's pretty much perpetual at this point, unless they decide to revisit it. And so I don't know that there's any other reason they would be reopening that statute. And you do also always have to worry when you reopen something like our definition as to what else might result from that effort. So it may be that we can better tackle that as part of this rulemaking, at least on forestry, maybe not on other topics, but at least on forestry.
At least a policy statement to make it clear to everyone, what's really supposed to be allowed.
Yeah, and I think that's easier said than done, but we feel like we need to say something. Hunting's a similar issue that we don't really use the word hunting in our part of the rules right now, but we get so many questions about it and there's so many conflicts about it that we have to at least articulate a little better what our policies are on that. You mentioned the legislature, though, as far as the definition. My understanding is that because of the controversy at Sparta Mountain, that there is a task force that has been organized to look at the forest stewardship plan process.
I am a member. I'm a member.
Okay.
For your information, I'm a member of the task force.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about, and I think we're hoping that might inform some of what we end up doing in the rules, that maybe that's the place where the forestry program could be encouraged to give better public notice or the opportunity to comment on those plans before they're implemented. And
Judith, one of the key recommendations, and I think the Forest Task Force will very soon submit a formal report to Senator Smith, but one of the recommendations is that there be rules adopted pursuant to the Administrative Procedure Act, just like we have rules for everything else. And that I would be hopeful that would help clear some of this problem with neighbors not feeling they got notice and they didn't know what was going on. If it's done the way we do every other land use regulation, they'll be noticed and there'll be comments, and it's just a regular process we follow for virtually every other type of land use in the state.
Thanks, that's helpful.
And
Nick, I do see your comment in the margin that you're also part of the task force, so thank you for that.
And thank you guys for what you're doing.
May I ask you a question? As part of your consulting firm, do you have a forester on staff?
I am a forester.
Okay.
I have a Bachelor of Science, a Master of Science from the State University of New York, College of Environmental Science and Forestry at Syracuse. And but for most of my career, I haven't practiced forestry in the sense that, you know, we go in and, you know, thin trees and try to create habitat and that sort of stuff. I've used, at the time I got my degree, there was no such thing as an environmental engineer. So the forestry schools provided that education, and I simultaneously went to engineering school at Syracuse University. So I combined the two to become an environmental consultant here in New Jersey for all kinds of projects. And it just turns out that forestry projects do come up from time to time.
I mean, I asked that question for two reasons. One is that right now, if a diversion of parkland involves tree removal, so you're removing trees for other than a recreational conservation purpose, we require the trees that are to be removed to be evaluated by a certified forester, or somebody on the department's list.
Yes, and that's
DOT
a
in
pretty
particular
comprehensive list.
Yeah, DOT in particular balked at that requirement. They have a lot of in the universe of who might be able to evaluate the trees on a parcel that's to be diverted. So if you have an opinion about that and want to send us an email about that, that would be helpful to figure out, you know, who really is qualified. Because
I'd be happy to do that, because foresters are certainly you know, a good source of talent to determine, you know, whether or not certain forest practices should be taking place. But sustainable forestry for my entire lifetime has been very different than sustainable ecological systems. Sustainable forestry means you don't want to cut down all the trees and use them for, you know, timber and wood products and not have any more to cut next year. So
yeah,
that's the whole idea.
I'm
trying to have a sustainable source of timber and wood products for society. So it's totally different than managing forests for ecological reasons.
And actually, I think what I'm asking is even more basic than that, because if someone wants to divert a property, say for a road project, and they know they're going to need to remove trees, what we need to know is what are the species, what is the size, what is the health of the individual tree, because we can apply some discounts for dead, diseased, dying trees. But I'm not sure. Like, I don't think I want to go so far as to say that your routine tree removal guys could make that evaluation, but I think a landscape architect probably could. So the question would be, are there other areas of expertise that could evaluate those individual trees? The other thing is
and there are.
Yeah, and the other thing is that over the years, you know, there have been complaints that our tree replacement formula results in excessive values for the trees because it's a basal area replacement formula. But we've said over the years that if somebody could come up with a better system, we'd be willing to consider it, and nobody has proposed anything to us. So I'll just put that out there for people to think about. And I would say, in fact, our no net loss program wishes they had a basal area replacement formula, because the values that they are required by statute to use are pretty low. So
I would just throw out there, I'm not going to mention names because I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but I am aware of at least one municipality that's had a commercial logging operation going on, the sole purpose of which was to cut down timber on Green Acres lands and sell it, and they get paid out of that, and the rest goes into the municipal treasury. And I am quite clear that that's a diversion, and that was never approved by the state commission. So it's out there. I don't know how many situations. I just became aware of one. And the good news is that, you know, having spoken to the municipality, they've ceased doing that. So that's the good news. I think we convinced them that it was wrong. But it happens.
I'm sure it does. And I'm sure we don't hear about it all the time when it does.
And it's approved,
Okay.
you know, it's approved by the certified foresters, it's approved by the state forester, you know.
Yeah, it's such
So
it's such
the
an
DEP,
emotional
you
issue
can't
for
count on
people.
the DEP to enforce the rules because they don't know your rules. They really don't know your rules.
Well, and that's something we can do even outside of the rulemaking, particularly once the task force issues its report. I mean, we do interact with Parks and Forestry on a pretty regular basis, and we can sit down with them at some point to discuss this.
Yeah, and that formal, that should be a formal process, you know, and a regular process. You know, as your rules change, you be the people who educate the DEP as to what they're supposed to be approving and not approving.
Well, thank you. That's all very helpful. I don't see anybody else in the chat who said they wanted to speak, but maybe as a result of this discussion, there are others.
Yeah, I think I see Nick Homiak offered some more comments in the chat, and I don't know if you'd like to read them or have me read them aloud.
Well, he just raised his hand if he
hand.
wants to speak again. Go ahead, Nick, but then after that, if anybody wants to talk about something other than forestry, feel free to put your name in the chat.
Hello? Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, you could read them if you want, but they add an extra layer. This Sparta Mountain actually took place. They ignored science that does exist, especially about the yellow-winged wobbler. They're moving north due to climate change and habitat loss overall in the Earth's biosphere. But I believe it's an attempt at minority rule after the damage has been done, and they're poo-pooing the pro-forestation element, which is to let trees mature at this point in time, because we're emitting more carbon. Finally, the Earth has reached a stage of entropy where more carbon is being put into the atmosphere than nature is allowed to take out. So by letting trees mature, Dr. Momaw's pro-forestation approach, you let the forest self-manage itself. You worry about things like invasives or other human impacts, ATVs, trash. That becomes the paradigm for forest management. But I could agree with the last speaker, because here in town in Parsippany, again, I know of 2 other incidences where they deforested landscapes in green acres without applying or getting green acre permits in riparian zones on the Rockaway River. They call them desnagging details or whatever. They have to go and they remove the debris along the river, you know, that gets all the plastics and all that stuff that's floating down. But they do it, and they take trees at the same time without N.J.A.C permits. And then if you had bats and birds into there, the fledgling birds and everything, we had one property here, they started taking down the trees at the wrong period in time, and had to blow the whistle because we're in the hibernum of the bats, and bats are in trouble. So there's a lot of things, like the speaker said, they ignore the rules. They do what they want to do. There's just too much laissez-faire out there. So if Green Acres can do something about this, it would be great.
Thank you. That's helpful, but also keep in mind, especially for activities in the riparian zone, that you can call the DEP hotline if you think that something that is happening.
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have an adopted area here in town in the knoll now for over 10 years, and you'd be surprised. I mean, you wouldn't be surprised the amount of trash in the frequency I pull out of that landscape.
Well, we rely on citizens like you to be our eyes and ears, so we appreciate the effort. But certainly if you think it's something that might be a land use violation, you should call the DEP hotline. I do know that they issue permits for desnagging of streams, so, you know, it may be that some of what you saw was authorized, but it's
No, it
hard for us to
wasn't.
know.
If it was not authorized, they had to have a meeting with the town and sit down and, you know, they weren't fined or anything, but you got to obey the rules, and they didn't obey the rules.
Well, thank you for your comments.
Okay.
Nancy, I see that Jess Cabito wants to comment again, followed by Dorothea Stilling, it looks like. So go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, I just got an email from Andy Koyman. And so I thought he's too busy to attend today, but I figured I'd just read it to you for your consideration. Not that this is a formal county comment. It's just, like I said, we've been going back and forth on trying to figure out how we can make this less burdensome. So he said, in thinking about Rossi amendments, I think there has to be a real distinction made between unfunded and funded parkland. If the county has decided to buy property without any funding assistance from Green Acres, then the requirements for revising the Rossi due to an oversight or error to bring it into compliance with the county road plan should be minimal. Funded parkland may require a little more regulation, but even then not much. Neither should rise to the level of a diversion, which is what the current rules require. So it's just some thoughts that he writes.
Thanks, that's helpful. Although I will point out that the court case that told us we had to scrutinize Rosie amendments closely did involve unfunded parkland. It did not involve a road project. It involved the town in which the property was located wanting to turn it into something completely different, which they were able to do in the end. So I don't know that we could make a funded, unfunded distinction so much, but you know, maybe special consideration for the road projects. Yeah, we're going to have to think about this, and you know, we'll maybe reach out to you guys separately to talk about how you normally establish your road rights of way or do your road planning.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Dorothea Stilling.
I think you're muted. See, maybe we can unmute you.
There we go.
Okay.
Yes. I for 20 years I was chair of the Chatham Township Environmental Commission, and I have to echo Jessica's comments. Chatham Township needed to make some very small diversions for various reasons, just minor diversions, and it took up an awful lot of staff time to go through all the cumbersome paperwork. It at the time, it really seemed nonsensical. So anything that I'm not familiar with the details the way Jessica is, but what she said certainly seemed to make sense, especially in view of the fact, I think you said the Green Acres rules have not been updated since 1995.
2005.
Oh, 2005. Okay.
Still not great, but not quite that long.
Still not great, no. So I'm really glad that Green Acres is taking an opportunity to look at their rules. In our town, Green Acres was regarded as kind of a religion. There would be a kind of a sigh of relief throughout the town whenever a property was known to be part of the Green Acres program. Yes, that's going to be preserved forever. And of course, you can always fiddle with the details, but in general, the Green Acres program is just very highly regarded, at least in my town. But it's certainly time to update the rules. And I think John Thonet was correct. At the time the rules were developed, conservation was something that everybody was just expected to understand. The details of conservation didn't really need to be worked out because everybody thought they knew what it meant. But now probably there does need to be some refinement of that definition. So I would echo John's thoughts about, among the other things you're going to do, to maybe clarify that some. But it certainly is true that if Green Acres didn't already exist, somebody would have had to put a program like that into effect. So thank you. Thank you. You're doing a great job.
Thanks. Well, certainly having attended National Land Trust conferences, people are envious of our funding situation over the years. So it took a lot of states a long time to realize what we seem to have realized in the 60s about the need to preserve properties. I will mention, as far as, you know, the difficulty of the process, well, a couple of things. So when we revised the rules in 2005, Brad Campbell was our commissioner, and he actually directed Green Acres to make the process more difficult. The phrase was raise the bar on diversions, because at the time, a lot of our nonprofit partners felt like it had become too easy to divert parkland, and they didn't want parkland to be replaced on a one-to-one basis. They thought the ratios should be higher. So
Yeah.
that's what we did.
Yeah.
But for the first time back then, because this is not in the statute, this is something we came up with, we made a distinction between categories of minor diversions and major diversions with the intention of making the minor process easier. But implementing it for all these years has made us realize we didn't make it easier enough. It takes almost as much time to get through a minor diversion as it does through a major. The big difference being one public hearing versus two for majors. And honestly, it takes up way too much of our staff time to be processing the minor diversions. So we share your goal of finding a way to carve off a whole bunch of different types of projects that have an obvious public purpose and, you know, obviously have to happen in that particular location, and making the process as easy as we can while still, you know, respecting the right of the public to know about these things and comment on these things. So I don't know quite yet what that's going to look like, but that is our objective.
Have you given any thought to how you're going to simplify the public notice requirement? How you're going to do that online? Because people do read newspaper notices. Now, the public notices are online, but when it's in a newspaper, it's just presented to somebody and they can browse it, rather than having to be proactive every day going to a website to check notices. So there may be an issue there.
Well, as I mentioned, I think most towns and counties are used to having to give legal notice of certain things that they do as being their official form of notice. So even though there's a cost associated with that, I don't think they find having to do that overly burdensome most of the time. And even though most people don't get a paper copy of the newspaper anymore, there are services that collect legal notices, and we're aware that, you know, nonprofits and other groups do kind of monitor those websites to see what's going on in the world. So I don't see us eliminating the legal notice requirement. What I envision doing as far as the online notification is, right now, the rule says that if the town or the county or the nonprofit even has a website, because back then we weren't sure they did, that they have to provide notice of the public hearing on the diversion application in the same manner as they advertise other events. I think we're probably going to go a little further than that and say that they need to create an information page for the application, and they need to put notice of the application in a prominent place on the front page of their website and not bury it. So that's kind of as far as I've gotten in my thinking about that.
We're also still going to require the sign at the park, correct, Judith?
Yes, we're not eliminating in 2005, for the first time, we required a physical sign on the park so that the people who live near the park and use the park can see that something's about to happen. We're going to maintain that requirement. Again, in some ways it's burdensome to have to create the sign, but we've been told by people it's an effective form of notice, so we're going to retain that.
Yes, yes, I think it is. I think it does call people's attention to the fact that this particular property is being looked at for something or other, and then they can go find more information online.
But I think because of the signage requirement, we're at least considering eliminating the 200-foot notification, because a lot of parks are either in an urban area where you would have to notify a whole bunch of people who probably also are able to see the sign, or they're big parks where you don't have that many neighbors within 200 feet. So we recognize that having to come up with that list and do that mailing, and a lot of times people do that certified mail, return receipt requested, that's a slog. And we're not sure it's a particularly effective form of notice for these diversion applications, given the other forms of notices. So I think we're at least thinking about eliminating that requirement. And if people want to comment on that one way or another, they can let us know.
Yeah, I think asking entities to put that notice on their websites, or even in some other social media form, is a very good idea.
Well, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't really thought about that, but if they have a Facebook page or social media, we can require them to put it on there too. I mean, for the first time, we advertise notice of these hearings on social media. So, because the department does press releases, but then you're dependent on the newspapers to pick them up and the public to actually see the newspaper. So,
yeah. And if I, for instance, were to notice to observe an odd-looking activity on a Green Acres parcel, who do I notify? Do I notify the DEP, and then it trickles down to you folks, or how does that work?
So if you think it's something like we were talking about before, where you're seeing somebody cutting down a tree in a stream corridor and you think it might be a land use violation, you can call the DEP hotline. If it's an activity happening in a park that you think is not recreation or conservation, you can either send, the best thing to do is to go to our website, and maybe we can put that address in the chat. Go to our website and go to the contact page. Our staff people are assigned to the 21 counties. So we have compliance officers, each of whom is assigned to 4 or 5 counties at the moment, and they can handle your call and advise you as to whether we think it's a problem.
Okay, so the procedure would be to go to the Green Acres website.
No, the website for the new office for OTPLA. So this new office that we're part of.
And then go to contact. Okay, so this is a new procedure. All right, that's good. Good.
Right, and we can, I mean, if it's something really egregious or sounds really alarming, we can send an inspector out there. We inspect funded parkland, directly assisted parkland on a 3-year cycle, but we can go out in between inspections if something's going on. And even the unfunded parks, if we get a complaint, we can go out and investigate. So we do that.
That was an issue. I'm affiliated with the Great Swamp Watershed Association, and they had an instance where a private somebody was doing something on their own private personal property. They were doing some kind of work, and they did dumping on the property of the Watershed Association. That particular piece of property was not funded by Green Acres, but so my question would be, that kind of thing would, if it were happening on Green Acres funded property, then we'd contact you through this new website.
Correct. The one we didn't help them buy, we would not get involved. But if you thought it was either a solid waste violation or possibly hazardous, you could call the hotline.
And I
And if you're
imagine,
not sure if something is funded or unfunded, you can certainly give the staff of Public Land Compliance a call or an email. Hey, this is happening here. Is
Yeah.
this encumbered? And if it's not, we tell you that, but then we'd point you to who you should contact.
yeah, in the case of the Watershed Association, we know what's funded and what isn't. I was just using that as an example because I would imagine that dumping on Green Acres property might be something that might happen fairly often. Uh, do you, well, just that was just an observation.
Thank you. That's helpful. I am
Okay,
wondering, I'm sorry, did you have any additional comments?
No. I just, I'm really glad that Green Acres is going through this process. I'm glad that there's enough energy going on in the background to realize that some things have to be updated.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
It's something we've wanted to do for a while, but as you can see, it's kind of a lengthy process. So
Yeah, everything takes. Well, my husband is a scientist, and he says everything takes exactly pi times as long to accomplish as you think it's going to in the beginning. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
So we've talked a lot about forestry, but I'm wondering if anyone who's on the phone who represents a municipality wants to share with us whether they allow hunting on their properties and what their system is for allocating hunting permits, assuming you have a permit system. Okay, Bedminster does not allow hunting. That's interesting. Part of why this comes up is our own Fish and Wildlife program. I think certainly over the years, individuals in that program have felt that because public money went into Green Acres encumbered properties, that they should all be open to hunting all the time. And our answer is always, we don't own those properties. We don't dictate that. But kind of like we get calls about forestry, we get calls about hunting, particularly when people feel like permission to hunt is being allocated unfairly. So we struggle a bit with how much detail we should put in the rules about that to try to make sure that hunting privileges are distributed fairly, but also, some towns don't actually want to allow recreational hunting, but they want to control the deer. Fish and Wildlife feels like recreational hunting should be able to address the deer problem most of the time, and that if areas were opened up for hunting, it would help control the deer. So I know not all towns feel that way. So thank you, Lebanon Township. If you want to share your program with us in your written comments, that would be great. Fish and Wildlife does have a program called the Community-Based Deer Management Program, where you can get permission for an alternative to a recreational hunt. I'm not super familiar with that process, but they've told us that that is the only alternative they sanction to recreational hunting. So we're going to have to look at that more closely and see if we want to mention that in the rules as well. Nancy, do we have anyone else in the chat that we missed?
We've hit everyone in the chat. I don't know if we want to ask the phone call the phone
Oh,
caller
sure.
if there's any comments. Mike, actually, I don't know if you're still on or not, but Mike Schmidt, if you want to make a comment or voice a concern, now would be a good time.
Okay, can you hear me? I am still on.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear
Okay.
you.
I was going to send a comment on your question regarding hunting. So several years ago, we passed a local ordinance allowing hunting on our local Green Acres, well, our township-owned open space, most of which had Green Acres funding or local funding under our Green Acres tax, local open space tax. We set it up as a lottery system, but to give ourselves flexibility, annually we have a resolution where we set the number of permits per parcel of land. Currently, the last few years, I think we're in our third year on it. We only allow bow hunting as we're sort of, working through the issues that neighbors may have with people hunting on open space, and obviously the compatibility of recreational hiking and use while hunting is going on had us start with bow hunting, and it's been pretty successful. We haven't been dramatically oversubscribed in our lottery system, but we have given out all the permits. We give preference to the residents since obviously the land is managed by local tax money, so residents get a preference, but if there aren't enough residents, then we have another set of criteria to issue the lottery system, which is managed through our police department since they're set up to receive people coming in, filling in applications. And we also require a level of insurance by the hunters to protect the residents and the like. So it's been pretty successful.
Thank you. And if you don't mind saying what town was that?
Oh, Lebanon Township in Huntington County.
Oh, got it. Okay. And I think the county does something similar as far as setting a number of permits per property. Does that sound familiar, Nancy?
Hunterdon County definitely does, and that's partly what we modeled our program after. Some of our
Got it.
neighboring townships do also.
So you kind of decide what the carrying capacity is for hunters for each property?
Exactly.
Okay.
And we give out, as I'm not a hunter, but there are 3 or 4 different permit seasons, call it, different permits that you need as you go through the year. And so we also evaluate, depending on how many hunters are looking for the permits, do we have one permit for the whole season? Do we have a lottery permit by permit? Like I say, we're just a few years into it, but we haven't had any issues with the residents. We're not one of the towns that has hired an outside agency to come and reduce the herd. I think that's where you get the more public interest, so to speak. But in our case, it's we're a rural township, and I think it's seen as a reasonable way to try to manage the deer. I think we have more people concerned about deer being hit by cars than by hunting.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Nancy Lawler, I know you said you'd give us more details about Lebanon Township's hunting program. If you have the ordinance handy that sets up the program, we'd really be interested in seeing that. We might have it already, but that would just help us see how you've laid this out and see what we might want to steal for the rules. Thanks, Nancy. I don't see anyone else in the chat who's asking to speak. I think Caroline, Nancy Lawrence, and I will be sticking on until noon regardless. There doesn't appear to be a need for us to go into the third hour. But we can certainly go on to other topics on the hot topics list if you'd like. And I do see your hand, Nick. So if you'd like to comment again, that's fine.
It's more of a question. Is there a minimum amount of land or acreage that the state will consider, and or would a lesser amount be given over to a local open space, and does that local open space include is it included on the N.J.A.C?
Okay, I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but on the local side of the program, so if your town is applying for Green Acres funding, they just propose whatever they want to propose to Green Acres as far as a project. So a project can either be acquisition of land or it can be park development, recreational facilities. So not development as in houses and condos, but park development. And in urban areas, those acquisitions can be really tiny, and in other parts of the state, they can be very large. There's really no size criteria as far as that goes. It's an evaluation of the project against other applications, although I think generally the funding program tries to approve projects in as many different towns and counties as they can, but they do only approve them one at a time. So in any given funding round, if your town applies, you maybe can propose multiple projects, but I think they would pick one acquisition and maybe one development, Nancy's nodding, to approve and give funding for, and then when you finish that project, you move on to the next. And towns can have multiple projects from multiple funding rounds, but you generally have to complete your project in like a 2 to 3 year time frame.
Would it involve any kind of rezoning ordinances?
I don't think so. So for an acquisition, there needs to be an appraisal. Someone needs to figure out what the property is worth. Whether that property has been recently rezoned or not is not something we get involved in. But a property is not going to be valued for development unless it has development approvals. So it's not what you can do under the zoning, it's what you have approvals to do in hand that affects the value of an acquisition project.
Yeah, I can give you a scenario, a case scenario that I'm thinking. I don't know. A former church parish. It includes a school, the church itself, and then a wooded lot that is like a real element of the neighborhood character. So would there be a way to say just preserve that wooded lot, to take it away from the total parish property and incorporate that wooded lot into a Green Acres acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. Generally speaking, the church would have to be willing to sell to whoever's applying for our funding, town, county, or nonprofit.
Mhm.
And then probably in that scenario, the town would insist on a subdivision of the property to separate the wooded lot from the buildings. But Green Acres would consider something like that to be eligible for funding if all the other T's are crossed and I's are dotted as far as how you normally acquire property and obtain our funding. If the church were not a willing seller, towns and counties have the ability to condemn property for open space. They don't do it that often, but it is done. The state does not condemn for open space. We need legislative approval to exercise condemnation for that purpose.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I see Robin Ray has a comment in the chat.
Yes, I was going to thank her for that additional detail about why Bedminster doesn't allow hunting. So, yeah, we can see that it's a pretty populous area up where you are, so that's understandable.
Yes, and she knows there are plenty of areas and hunt clubs to hunt throughout Bedminster that are not Green Acres, so they have alternative places.
Okay, we have about a half an hour left. I don't know if anybody else would like to comment or whether there's other topics people would like to address.
It's good to hear that everyone loves all aspects of our rules.
Well, that
Rob.
spurred some comment, Nancy. I think Robin had her hand up first.
Hi, I did have a question. So we have some Green Acres lands, obviously parks, they're active recreation parks. One to find out about adding some other uses to that park, such as a community garden and installation of restroom facilities. How do we go about doing that?
So structures need our approval, but generally speaking, adding restrooms is going to be fine. You know, and we're not looking to second guess your choice of what kind of structure you want to put there, except to the extent of verifying that what you want to put there is for recreation and conservation purposes, because once you build that building, it's hard to get it off there if we decide later that it's not consistent with the Green Acres restrictions. So whether it's funded or unfunded parkland, you should contact your county steward, and who has Bedminster is Somerset, right? Is that Jess Patterson right now?
Jessica has Somerset, yes.
Okay, so you should contact Jessica Patterson. For all of us, it's first name dot last name at dep.nj.gov. So Jessica.Patterson, Patterson at dep.nj.gov. And she can kind of walk you through that process. So generally speaking, we want to see a plan for the building and issue approval or not approval before you get too far into that process. But your other restrooms, and what was the other thing you wanted to add there? You're muted, I'm sorry.
I said community garden.
Oh, community gardens are fine as well. In fact, when the Preserve New Jersey Act was reauthorized, there was a specific provision put in there about community gardens because apparently someone was under the impression that we don't allow them, but we always have. Our concern with community gardens has always just been making sure that it doesn't result in a large part of a park being fenced off and inaccessible to the public. So, generally speaking, basically we see that as a form of recreation, but generally speaking, during daylight hours, we just don't want there to be a lock or a high fence around the garden. We still want people to be able to wander through their public parks. So Jess can help you with that as well, but generally community gardens are not controversial. We just want to make sure it's not resulting, again, in diminished use of the park, but also kind of turning a chunk of a park over to a particular group for an extended period of time, like just not exclusive use. You can engage a nonprofit or a friends group to help you run it. We're not saying it has to be run by township employees, but we just wouldn't want them to be able to exclude the public during that time.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
And if it's on funded parkland, we would also access comes into play as well, that it can't be resident only if it's unfunded parkland. But any change, bathrooms, community gardens, anything that's happening on funded parkland, it's always nice to just drop a line to us so that I can update the inspection notes. So when the inspector goes out there and like, hey, wow, this tennis court is now a community garden, it's just nice. So we're not kind of asking some questions after the fact. Again, completely allowable, but it's always for the inspectors, it's nice to know if there's been any changes that they're not stumbling upon. I went to a park that had some benches, and in 3 years it was completely changed to completely developed with playground equipment, which was fine, but I was questioning whether or not I was in the right place because it looks so different from the previous inspection. So we do ask if you make changes to funded stuff, just to let us know for inspection purposes.
Okay, and that would also go through Jessica.
Yes.
That can go through Jessica. Yep. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
You should also tell her about any fees you plan to charge if it is on ON funded parkland. We don't regulate fees for unfunded parkland, but we at least try to make sure that for funded parkland, the fees are reasonable and non-discriminatory and don't discourage the public from using the park.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think Dorothea had her hand up again.
Yes, I was just going to say, after all these meetings, are there 1 or 2 or 3 topics that have come up so frequently that there are going to be changes made to the regulations in those areas? What's foremost on people's minds now after all these meetings?
Well, this was somewhat prompted by our hot topics list, but the hot topics list was informed by the things people ask us about. So I think going into it, we knew that people wanted to talk about agriculture, forestry, and hunting, and that's a lot of what we've ended up talking about in these meetings. And it's not so much that we're going to change what we're doing. The issue is that we don't really say a whole lot, and we don't say anything about hunting in our part of the rules. We don't say anything about forestry. So we feel now we need to say something, although we haven't completely decided what we want to say. On agriculture, we have a little bitty section in the section that tells you have to submit leases for our approval. And it has a few kind of best practices there that you have to follow if you're leasing for agriculture. But I think we need to expand that section to address things like reasonable public access when you do lease areas for farming. I think people want us to say something about pesticides. I'm not sure we can. So again, we haven't completely decided, but we just get calls about it frequently enough. And definitely on agriculture, there's 2 points of view. There's the Farm Bureau and the farming community, and some smaller nonprofits that engage in farming want us to allow farming more widely than we do now. And other groups feel like it's not even appropriate on a Green Acres encumbered park, particularly because agriculture is not part of that definition of recreation and conservation purposes. So there was litigation in Montgomery Township about whether farming's even supposed to be allowed on Green Acres encumbered parks. And the town was able to argue to the trial court that they were allowing it as an interim management practice on their park and that it wouldn't be permanent. That case was appealed, but it was then settled. So there hasn't really been a definitive statement on whether you can have farming forever on a Green Acres encumbered park. I don't know whether we're going to make that statement or not in the rules, but we're at least thinking about what we should say about farming.
Okay, thanks. Just to have an idea of what you're trending toward, what kinds of things. That's good.
Yeah, definitely we will be saying something about all 3 of those topics and probably a few more off that list. I just wanted to encourage people, if you've made your comment, don't feel that you have to stay on the phone until noon. We will be posting the recording of the meeting online as soon as it's available. So you can certainly go back and watch the next 20 minutes if additional people comment and you want to go back and see that. But we know you're all pretty busy. So if you want to drop off the call, feel free. We're going to stick around until noon just because we advertised it as a 2-hour meeting in case people join us late in the game. Nick, go ahead.
What is the largest pending Green Acre acquisition in the state at this time?
On the local side of the program?
Anywhere in the state, the largest acreage or the habitat sensitive area?
Well, I think we would have to get back to you on that. We'd have to consult our Green Acres counterparts and see what's in the pipeline. I can tell you that a few years ago, the acquisition of a conservation easement on the Kellogg property was, what, 7,000 acres, I think. I mean, and some of the South Jersey acquisitions can be fairly large, but I honestly don't know what we have in the pipeline right now. But if you'd like, we can ask and get back to you.
That's all right. The funding is secured, right? There's no more looting of the funds that happened during one particular administration for, I guess tax patches or budget fixes.
Well, that's the beauty of a constitutional amendment. It makes that harder. I will say, though, that because the division, so the percentage of the CBT, I think, is secure as far as the source of funding, although, of course, it fluctuates depending on what the tax collections are. And right now, the allocation of the funds between us and Farmland Preservation and the Historic Trust is set by statute. I can tell you, though, that every year there's at least chatter about people wanting to peel money off the top or allocate the funds differently. I think that would have to happen either as part of the budget process or as a reopening of the Preserve New Jersey Act. So it probably pays to pay attention to the appropriation bills when they're released, because they can pretty much change things in an appropriation bill. It can be the equivalent of a legislative amendment. So that part could still happen, but the overall funding pot is secure.
But if that was to happen, would you be allowed to protest, or you would be muted?
Well, if it happened through an actual reopening of the Preserve New Jersey Act, that would be a bill to amend the Preserve New Jersey Act. It would go into committee. The department would have to decide what position to take on it, and it depends on what it's for. But the public can attend those legislative committee meetings and object to those proposals. If it happened in the budget process, I think, again, that's where you have to pay attention to what they're saying in the budget and how they might be shuffling funds around.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks.
It'd be good just to remind folks of the 3 upcoming meetings, 2 next week on the 24th and 26th, and then 1 on January 31st in the evening. And we'll continuously be taking written comments to our email address, even after stakeholder.
And the meetings next week are in the afternoon. So this meeting and last week's meetings were at 10 a.m. We're doing 2 afternoon sessions next week. And then, as Caroline mentioned, an evening meeting for those who might not be able to attend during the day. Thanks. Thank you to Jessica for that comment. We appreciate your participation. And I see you have your hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I just revisit something that you said early on? It was
Sure.
about the mitigation for the trees. It appears there is a section that says here, the plan may take into account the condition of the trees which are dead, dying, diseased, and may assert pre-existing legal rights pertaining to tree removal. So that's already kind of built in there, right?
It is.
So what was your comment regarding the size of the tree, I believe it was?
Well, what I was saying is DOT for a long time has been lobbying us. Right now, the only person who can produce a tree replacement plan for purposes of our application is a certified forester. So a forester who's taken the test and is on DEP's list of certified forester.
Okay.
Generally speaking, that involves groups having to go out and hire an expert, which they don't want to have to do. And in particular, DOT, when it has a road project, has said to us multiple times, we have all these landscape architects on staff, can't we use a landscape architect? And it's been hard to tell them that they could because the rule specifically says certified forester. So it would seem to us that a landscape architect could evaluate what species of tree, how big it is, and what the condition is. So we were looking to see if people agreed with us on that and whether there might be other types of expertise that we could add to that list to say, okay, you can have a plan produced by a landscape architect, a certified forester, or fill in the blank. Where I don't want to go with this is kind of, again, the guys who roam your neighborhood with chainsaw who pass themselves off as tree experts. I'm trying to distinguish between people who have actual expertise and people who are just kind of tree technicians. So
okay. I can look into that. As far as Monmouth County, I know the landscape architect is right next door, so I can ask him if he's got ideas.
Right. Are there other, somebody like John said, with a forestry degree, or are there other types of certifications? I mean, landscape architects at least are licensed, so I would hope they could identify their trees.
Yeah.
But are there other types of experts we could add to that list to maybe make that a little less burdensome as far as coming up with a tree replacement plan?
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you for asking for the clarification, because we do want input on that. I think we are going to stop recording. Like I said, Nancy, Carolyn, and I will stay on the line in case anyone joins us between now and noon. And we'll resume the recording if people do join us late. So again, if you want to leave the call, you can check back on our website and see the recording at that point. Just find where I do that. Go ahead.
So I asked our landscape architect, and he said a landscape architect also does planting plans. An arborist is certified to do that as well. Tree experts. Anything else? Wetland scientists, I think they might have specialty as well. Those were the ideas he came up with.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and I appreciate you tracking that information down so quickly.
Sure. Okay.
I think wetland scientists might be a little tough, but I think the other ones sound promising.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I just threw that out there. But you said arborist and is certified, and yeah, they have to be certified and a tree expert.
Okay.
What's the difference between an arborist and a tree removal person? Okay. Okay. Well, I'll let you guys figure that one out. But those are some ideas he threw out there.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. I'm going to stop recording again.